Pick that up, sweetheart. That is what Dr. Whitfield said 47 minutes before the convoy arrived. Cedar Creek Medical's night shift hums under fluorescent lights that turn skin the color of old paper. The building breathes at 2 a.m. like something half awake, monitors beeping their steady rhythm down corridors that smell of antiseptic and the particular exhaustion that only hospitals know. Laura Bennett moves through the ER with economy of motion, no wasted steps, no gestures that might draw attention. She wears navy scrubs that hang loose enough to hide the architecture of scars on her shoulders, the ones that map themselves across her deltoids in patterns that look almost intentional, almost like someone planned them. When she restocks the trauma bay on the third pass of her shift, her hands organize supplies in a sequence that makes no sense to anyone watching. Tourniquets positioned top left where muscle memory knows to reach, 7x7 chest seals within arm's reach of the central workstation, pediatric airway kit at eye level, larger tubes below. She moves like someone placing instruments in a cockpit before a sortie, muscle groups remembering geometry her conscious mind has learned not to speak aloud. It is 11:19 p.m. when she opens her locker in the staff break room and touches the boots. They sit on the bottom shelf beneath her street clothes, a pair of desert tan Bates lights, the leather cracked and darkened with age, the soles thick with dried mud that she has never cleaned away. The mud comes from Ramadi. Specifically from a street in the Jolan district on a date she stopped counting years ago, and the mud has become something between a memorial and a talisman. She lets her fingertips trace the patterns in the treads, feeling the texture like reading Braille, and for exactly 6 seconds she is not a nurse in Portland. She is somewhere else. Someone else. Then she closes the locker door and the moment breaks like glass. The night shift at Cedar Creek Medical operates under its own physics. The ER runs at a particular temperature, a particular frequency, slower than days, more deliberate, populated by the people who arrive when the world has already gone wrong and there is nowhere else to go. The nurses move like they have been moving for hours, because they have. The residents punch the clock looking hollow-eyed and desperate for coffee that tastes like it was brewed in 1994. The attending physicians exist in their own orbit, untouchable and certain. Dr. Marcus Whitfield arrives at 11 p.m., and he is the kind of person who walks into a room and makes the light look wrong. He is tall in the way that people often mistake for competence, with the kind of face that photographs well and a voice that carries the weight of someone who has never been told no by anyone who mattered. He wears a white coat that costs more than some people's rent, and his hands rest in his pockets with the confidence of someone who has never had to work hard enough to doubt himself. He is charming with the first-year residents, makes jokes they laugh at too loudly, asks about their rotations like he genuinely cares. With the nursing staff, something shifts. His smile becomes a different shape. His patience becomes something he is performing rather than feeling. Laura is on her fourth circuit through the supply inventory when she sees the discrepancy. The trauma bay logbook sits on the metal desk, the pages worn soft from handling, filled in by nurses across 72 different shifts. She is running the 11 p.m. count when her eye catches the line that doesn't fit. Surgical mesh, for 0.7 mm pore size, sterile. The inventory sheet from last Tuesday shows 12 units signed out. The current physical count, which she just finished, shows for units remaining. 8 units are gone. No documentation. No patient charts cross-referenced. No explanation. She writes down the discrepancy without any change in her breathing. Her pen doesn't hesitate. Her hands don't tremble. This is what training does to a person. It turns uncertainty into data and data into patterns, and patterns into conclusions. She has seen supply chain problems before, in different contexts, under different flags. Sometimes supplies disappear. Usually there is a reason. Usually someone is making money. She closes the logbook and hears footsteps on the tile. The sound arrives before the person does. Birkenstocks with wet treads, probably from the rain that started an hour ago, the kind of shoes that announce themselves the way some people announce themselves, loudly and with no consideration for the space they are entering. Dr. Whitfield rounds the corner of the supply room, his hand on the doorframe, his eyes moving from the equipment racks to her face with the velocity of a targeting system. He smiles. It is the smile of someone who has just made a decision. Don't you have actual nursing work to do, Bennett? His voice is warm. That is the dangerous part. He says her name like he knows her, like they share something. The warmth makes the question feel like concern, like he is worried about her workload, her safety, her well-being. But his eyes are somewhere else entirely. His eyes are taking inventory of her in the same way she takes inventory of supplies, noting what is there, what is missing, what might be valuable. Laura closes the logbook with a soft sound. She sets her pen down on the metal desk with the same care she would use with a clinical instrument. She does not look at him immediately. She finishes what she is doing first. She breathes in through her nose and out through her mouth, a cycle that takes exactly 4 seconds. Then she turns. "Supply counts," she says. Her voice is even. It doesn't ask permission. Part of the rotation. He steps into the supply room fully now, and the space between them shrinks from 6 feet to 4. His body language is loose, relaxed, the posture of someone who owns the room. He glances at the logbook on the desk, and something flickers across his face, not worry, not exactly. Recognition, maybe. The look of a man who has just understood that someone has noticed something he preferred remain hidden. Inventory is the supply department's job, he says. Not nursing. Nursing staff restocks, Laura says. Part of restocking is accuracy. She does not add anything more. She does not explain or justify or apologize. She simply states facts. This is her composure style, not deferential, but not defiant either. Professional. Measured. The kind of response that offers no handle for him to grab, no reaction for him to work with. It is the voice of someone who has sat in rooms with people far more dangerous than Dr. Whitfield and learned that silence is a stronger weapon than anger. His smile doesn't change, but the shape of his jaw does. Something tightens there. He looks at her for a long moment, really looks, as if he is seeing something he did not expect, and then he turns and leaves the supply room without another word. The Birkenstocks make their wet sounds on the tile, fading back toward the main ER, back toward the residents and the residents' papers and the people he can actually control. Laura stands in the supply room, surrounded by boxes and sterile packages and the weight of the thing she has just started. She reaches down and pulls the logbook toward her again. The discrepancy sits there on the page, inert but factual. 12 units. For units. 8 units missing. She writes it down on a separate piece of paper and tucks it into her scrub pocket. She will check the purchase orders next shift. She will trace the chain. She will find the pattern. She doesn't know yet that Dr. Whitfield has already made his own decision. She doesn't know that in his office on the 3rd floor, his phone is already in his hand, that he is already scrolling through the contacts list to people who owe him favors, other administrators, people in supply chain management, someone in HR with a complicated financial situation that Dr. Whitfield has been very useful in resolving. She doesn't know that her job, as it exists in this moment, is already being dismantled by someone with institutional power and the willingness to use it. She only knows what she saw. 12 units. For units. 8 units gone. She returns to the ER and continues her shift. The night moves forward. A woman comes in with chest pain. Laura starts an 4-line, 1 smooth motion, 18 gauge, the needle sliding into the left arm with the kind of precision that comes from doing something 10,000 times. The woman relaxes once the line is in. "Thank you," she says. Laura nods. She checks the orders. She monitors the cardiac monitor. She documents everything. She moves through her duties with the steady competence of someone trained for situations far more catastrophic than what Cedar Creek Medical can offer. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part is that Dr. Whitfield is smarter than she gave him credit for. The worst part is that his network is wider and deeper than supply chain discrepancies. The worst part is that she has just made an enemy of someone who was already preparing to make an enemy of her, and she has given him the justification he needed. In her locker, before she leaves at 7 a.m., she touches the combat boots one more time. The midnight cafeteria at Cedar Creek Medical hummed with the fluorescent buzz of the graveyard shift, half full, the kind of quiet that comes from exhaustion rather than peace. Laura Bennett stood 3 people back in the food line, holding a tray with coffee and a sandwich she already knew she wouldn't eat. Her badge caught the overhead light, RN, Trauma Unit, Cedar Creek. Nothing else. Dr. Whitfield arrived with 3 residents trailing behind him like satellites orbiting the sun. His voice pitched high enough to carry across the cafeteria, calculated, public, designed for an audience. Gentlemen, I'll give you odds. 5-1 says the new girl doesn't make it through the week. He didn't say Laura's name. Didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew exactly who he meant. The cafeteria air seemed to shift, the kind of atmospheric pressure change that comes before a storm. One resident laughed nervously. Another shook his head and started to speak. Come on, Dr. Whitfield, but Whitfield cut him off with the casual precision of a man accustomed to silencing objections. No, I'm serious. Some people aren't built for real medicine. He waved his hand vaguely, dismissively. They're built for. He let the sentence hang like a blade. Bedpans and blood pressure cuffs. Comfort care. Holding hands. That sort of thing. Laura paid for her coffee. The cashier wouldn't meet her eyes. Everyone in Portland's medical community was connected by threads of gossip and professional survival. She turned toward an empty table, her movements economical, efficient, the kind of careful footwork developed over 20 years of existing in spaces where existing quietly was survival. Whitfield stepped directly into her path. What happened next had the quality of choreography, though no one planned it. His elbow caught her tray in the chaos of people shifting, chairs scraping. The coffee exploded across the tile in a brown arc, misting the air with the sharp smell of burnt grounds and scalded ceramic. Her sandwich skid under a table. The cafeteria went dead silent, the kind of silence where the fluorescent light suddenly became audible, a high-pitched hum like electricity itself was holding its breath. Laura kneeled immediately. She didn't hesitate. Didn't show frustration or embarrassment. She simply dropped to her knees and began pulling napkins from her pocket. She always kept napkins, same way soldiers always kept paracord, and wiped up the spill with methodical precision. Each movement deliberate. Each swipe removing evidence that she had ever been hungry. Whitfield let 10 seconds pass. Long enough for everyone to watch. Long enough for the weight of it to settle into the marrow. Then he dropped her patient charts at her feet. The paper scattered across the wet floor, corners curling as they absorbed coffee. 6 months of patient notes, medication reconciliations, care plans, the bureaucratic evidence of her competence scattered like trash. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said, and his voice carried the particular cruelty of someone apologizing for something he meant to do. "While you're down there, sweetheart," the word was a knife. "Pick that up, will you?" Laura gathered each chart. Her jaw clenched once, a muscle jumping beneath her skin, but her hand stayed perfectly steady. Her breathing didn't change, trained control, the kind that comes from survival situations where panic equals death. Her face could have been carved from stone, the kind of composure that comes from having already survived worse than a surgeon's petty humiliation. She stood, charts aligned perfectly in her hands, each one organized by patient number, and walked back to the ER without looking at Whitfield, without looking at the residents, without acknowledging the weight of 30 pairs of eyes tracking her movement across the cafeteria floor. Only her hands, briefly, showed the cost, a tremor that lasted exactly 2 seconds before discipline reasserted itself. The ER doors swung shut behind her. Nobody moved for several seconds. One of the residents looked at Whitfield and saw something in his expression that made him deeply uncomfortable, not satisfaction, but something closer to frustration, the look of a man trying to break a stone wall with his bare hands and finding it doesn't crack the way he expected. Whitfield had expected tears. Expected anger. Expected the kind of emotional response that would give him something to exploit, something to report to administration, a documentation trail leading toward termination. What he got instead was silence. Later, after the shift noise died down and the night shift settled into its rhythm of monitoring monitors and checking for lines, Laura finished her charting and walked to the supply closet. The door was heavy, sound dampening, the kind of room where the world went away. She sat on the floor between the shelves, her back against the antiseptic smell of sterile gauze and saline, and pulled out her phone. The photos were still there. The one she'd never deleted. A 6-year-old Iraqi boy with dust in his hair, sitting in a field hospital bed at FOB Shank, alive. The same child photographed 3 weeks later, standing on crutches, his left leg wrapped in bandages, smiling like he didn't understand yet what pain meant. She'd pulled him from the rubble of a collapsed market in the Jolan district during a firefight, 18 minutes of movement under effective small arms fire, 2 Marines providing suppressive fire, the sound of 5.56 rounds punching through concrete, the child screaming, her hand steady, her voice calm, "You're safe. I've got you. Stay with me." Now that child was a man. A major. Special forces. Built from the rubble she'd carried him out of. Her hand started to shake. Not from humiliation. Not from Whitfield's cruelty. The trembling came from something deeper, muscle memory triggered by stress, her body remembering Ramadi in a way her mind had learned to compartmentalize. She sat on the cool tile floor and closed her eyes and counted her breaths the way she'd learned in that field hospital, the way she'd taught the 6-year-old boy to breathe when the pain was too much. 4 in. Hold. 6 out. 4 in. Hold. 6 out. The trembling slowly released its grip. She opened her eyes and looked at the shelf above her head. There, in her personal locker tucked between the extra stethoscope and the spare badge, sat a pair of worn combat boots, desert tan, salt-stained, the leather cracked from 2 decades of operational use. She reached up and touched them once, just her fingertips, the way a person touches something sacred. She didn't change clothes. Didn't clean up. Didn't go home to process. Instead, she stood, pocketed her phone, and walked back to the ER where the monitors beeped their steady rhythms and the night shift continued its work, the quiet work of keeping people alive in the dark. At 1:08 a.m., her pager went off. The ambulance bay doors exploded open and 2 paramedics wheeled in a stretcher moving fast, moving with the urgency that means the patient is leaving them on the approach ramp. The man on the stretcher was in his late 20s, civilian clothes soaked black with blood, 3 entrance wounds visible like accusations, right shoulder, left flank, upper thigh. No exit wounds. The paramedics were shouting their narrative at double speed, the way they did when they knew what they were bringing in was a race against physics. GSW times 3, BP 80/40 and dropping, tachycardic at 140, we've got 2 lines in but he's circling the drain, ETA to trauma bay. Laura was already moving. Her brain shifted into a gear the other night nurses didn't possess, a gear that had been forged in Ramadi, sharpened through 2 decades of muscle memory and training that never quite left the nervous system. She saw the distended jugular veins immediately. Saw the way his breath sounded muffled, congested, wrong. Saw the monitor showing elevated pressure in the right atrium, the heart rhythm becoming increasingly irregular as the muscle suffocated in its own sac. Cardiac tamponade. Blood filling the pericardium, the membrane surrounding the heart, crushing the organ with every beat. Every second that passed was a second closer to total cardiovascular collapse. The on-call surgeon was Dr. Martinez, stuck somewhere in Portland traffic 15 minutes out. The attending was Dr. Whitfield, and he stood frozen at the stretcher's edge, his expression going through the calculation, how bad is this, what does protocol say, what should he do first? Laura snapped, voice like a command transmission, the kind that carries across gunfire and helicopter noise and gets obeyed. He needs a pericardiocentesis now or he's gone in 3 minutes. Whitfield's head whipped toward her, anger flashing across his face like light off a blade. I didn't ask for your medical opinion, Nurse Bennett. Set up for intubation. But Laura was already moving toward the ultrasound machine, already prepping the needle kit, already calculating angles and anatomy the way she'd been trained to calculate tactical approaches. The patient's blood pressure dropped to 70/30 in real time. The monitor alarm screamed its electronic panic across the trauma bay. Whitfield froze. Not dramatically. Just a 2-second pause, the kind that happens when a surgeon realizes he's about to watch someone die and doesn't know how to stop it. Laura made a choice. She met his eyes, and something shifted in her face, a curtain pulling back, the timid night nurse vanishing and something else emerging. When she spoke, her voice had dropped an octave. "Step aside, doctor. Now." Something in those 2 words made him move. The ambulance bay doors exploded open at 1:51 a.m. The stretcher came through like a missile, wheels squealing against polished floor, paramedics calling vitals in the staccato rhythm of controlled panic. A man in his late 20s, civilian clothes soaked dark red, 3 holes punched through his torso that should have killed him already. The fact that he was still breathing meant nothing. The fact that his eyes were still open meant less. Laura looked up from the computer station where she'd been charting vitals on a stable pneumonia admit. 3 seconds. That's all it took for her to read the scene, the paramedic's tight jaw, the way the second medic's hands were shaking slightly on the oxygen bag, the arterial spray pattern on the stretcher rail. 3 gunshot wounds. Close range. Professional execution. Except he was still alive, which meant one of 2 things: the shooter had missed, or the target had moved. The trauma team mobilized like cells responding to infection. Door swung open. The patient disappeared into trauma bay 4. Dr. Martinez, the attending surgeon, was already moving toward the bay, still pulling on his gown. The residents, 2 of them, fresh from their morning sign-in, were running to catch up, faces pale with the particular fear that comes from seeing a salvageable human being turned into a medical emergency in real time. Laura moved with the crowd, but not toward the bay. Not yet. She went to the supply station outside the doors, hands already moving before her mind caught up. 18-gauge needles. Sterile gloves. Ultrasound probe. Syringe. The equipment materialized in her hands like muscle memory was doing the thinking for her. Which it was. Which it always was, on nights like this. She could hear the chaos from the supply station, 2 large bore 4s, Martinez shouting. Type O, 6 units, massive transfusion protocol. A monitor beeping in that urgent rhythm that meant the heart was screaming. Feet moving fast. Someone saying, BP 72/40 and dropping. The fluorescent lights hummed their electric complaint, indifferent to the fact that a man was probably dying 20 feet away. The pericardial effusion would kill him before the hemorrhage did. Laura knew this the way she knew how to breathe. The blood from the gunshot wounds wasn't pooling in the abdomen where it could be managed. Some of it was leaking into the pericardial sac, the membrane surrounding the heart. With each milliliter of blood accumulating, the heart's chambers had less room to expand, less room to fill, less room to pump. The pressure around the organ would climb until the heart couldn't beat anymore. Cardiac tamponade. It was a death sentence dressed up in medical terminology. Laura walked into the bay without being called. The patient was already on the monitor. His chest was exposed, pale as old bone, the 3 entry wounds like accusations. The chest tube was going in. Martinez was already prepping the left side for insertion. The resident was running the ultrasound across the abdomen, looking for free fluid, for bleeding, for anything that would tell them where the blood was going. But Laura's eyes went to the chest. She could feel it, the way pressure builds in a confined space. She could see it in the patient's color, in the way his neck veins were distended despite the aggressive fluid resuscitation already running through 2 large bore lines. "He's in tamponade," Laura said. Her voice was steady. Professional. Just a nurse stating an observation. Dr. Whitfield was standing near the doorway. He had come when the alarm sounded. The ER director always came to the traumas. He was watching with the expression of a man who had witnessed medical crises before but no longer trusted his hands to manage them. Or maybe he was watching for something else. A test. A moment of weakness. A reason. Martinez didn't hesitate. He was a competent surgeon with good instincts, the kind who made fast decisions when the clock was already running out. "Pericardiocentesis," he said. "Get me an 18-gauge spinal needle and an ultrasound." The needle was already in Laura's hand. The ultrasound probe was already warm, still in its sterile packaging. She had moved while Martinez was speaking, anticipating not because she was exceptional but because the steps were worn into her like grooves in stone. 20 years ago, she had done this under fire, in the rubble of a bombed-out building with incoming rounds hitting concrete, with a 6-year-old boy's blood on her hands and no time to think about whether she was qualified to save his life. She was qualified now. The situation just happened to be a little quieter. The patient's skin was cool and clammy. His eyes were half closed, rolling slightly. The way a drowning man's eyes look right before the water takes him. Laura prepped the subxiphoid area, the soft space just below the tip of the breastbone, with betadine, moving with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who had already survived the worst. Her hands didn't shake. They never shook in the moment. The trembling came later, alone in the dark, when the adrenaline wore off and the memory caught up. "Ultrasound," she said. Not a request. An instruction. The resident moved the probe into her left hand. The monitor came alive with the ghostly image of the heart, a black and white shadow pounding like a fist against something invisible. And there it was. The pericardial effusion. A dark halo of blood surrounding the heart like a noose tightening. The ventricles were barely expanding. They were running out of time. They had maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5. The numbers were academic. The problem was now. Laura's right hand moved with the needle. The angle was perfect because it had been perfect 1,000 times before. 18-gauge spinal needle entering just below the xiphoid process, aiming toward the left shoulder. The patient gasped. His back arched slightly. His eyes opened, seeing nothing. "Stay with me," Laura said. Her voice was almost gentle, the way a mother's voice sounds when she's holding something that's drowning. "You're safe. Stay with me." The needle was in. She could feel the resistance change as the tip entered the pericardial sac. She attached the syringe. Dark blood filled the chamber immediately, arterial pressure meeting syringe vacuum. 40 milliliters. 60. 80. The monitor above the patient's head began to change. The blood pressure climbed like a man climbing out of water. 72/40. 85/45. 95/50. The patient's color shifted from gray to the pale shade of someone who might survive the next minute. His eyes opened fully. They locked onto Laura's face. His lips moved. Barely a whisper. The kind of sound a person makes when they're coming back from underwater, gasping for air that tastes like survival. He said a word. 2 syllables. Military phonetic. Call sign. The kind of name that only existed in classified briefings and mission logs and the private memory of people who had walked through fire together. "Lighthouse 1, he whispered. Laura's composure cracked. For half a second, maybe less, her eyes widened. Her breath caught in her throat. The mask slipped. It was just a moment, a flicker of recognition that crossed her face like lightning, but in a trauma bay full of watching residents and attending surgeons and a hospital director looking for weaknesses, a half-second of vulnerability was a lifetime. The mask slammed back down. Professional. Composed. A nurse performing a procedure. Just a nurse. The patient's eyes were clearing now. He was trying to speak, his voice raw and fractured. "You? I know you," or the girl with the... His hand moved, reaching for her. "You carried me." Dr. Martinez burst through the doors. He took in the scene, the patient awake, the blood pressure climbing, the syringe still in Laura's hand, and his face shifted from panic to purpose. "Good work," he said. "Get him prepped for the OR. I need a surgical team. Now." The bay exploded into motion. The residents started barking orders. Nurses appeared with equipment. The stretcher was moving, being wheeled toward the surgical suite. Laura stepped back smoothly, became just a nurse again, just staff, just the person who happened to be holding a syringe full of blood at the moment everything changed. But Dr. Whitfield was already moving. He pulled Martinez aside in the hallway, his voice low and controlled, the way poison delivered in a whisper is still poison. Laura couldn't hear the words, but she could read the body language. The finger pointing back toward the trauma bay. The head shake. Martinez's expression hardening from gratitude to something more complicated. She turned away. She didn't need to hear it. She already knew what was coming. The supply closet was empty, the way supply closets always are at 1:08 in the morning when everyone else is fighting death in a trauma bay. Laura pulled the door closed behind her. The darkness was complete. The shelves around her were stacked with the machinery of healing, gauze, tape, catheters, medications in bottles and vials. All the things that keep people alive. None of it had ever been enough to save her, so she had learned to save herself. Her hands were still steady. But in the darkness, where no one could see, they began to shake. Not from fear. Not from the crisis. From the weight of a name she hadn't heard in 20 years. From the memory of a 6-year-old boy with blood on his small face and her arms carrying him through streets that were burning. From the impossible fact that the man in the trauma bay, the man with 3 gunshot wounds and a second chance at life, had grown up to be something dangerous and trained and alive. In the darkness, the trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. The Major's eyes flickered open. Once. Twice. Then locked directly on Laura's face. His hand moved, trembling, reaching for her wrist. His grip was weak, blood loss, shock, the machinery of survival still reasserting itself, but his eyes were clear. Terrifyingly clear. The kind of clarity that comes from recognizing someone you've been searching for across 2 decades. His lips formed a single word. Soundless at first. Then whispered, raw, like pulling a name from deep water, Lighthouse 1. The monitors around them continued their rhythm. Beep. 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 Oxygen saturation climbing. Pressure stabilizing. Everything clinical, everything measured, everything normal except for the way the room seemed to tilt on its axis. Laura's hands had stopped moving. Her body understood what her mind was still assembling. This was not a patient. This was the boy. The 6-year-old with dust in his hair and blood on his small shirt, pulled from rubble in the Jolan district while bullets tore through the air like furious wasps. This was the child she'd carried through fire, shrapnel lodging in her own back, her own blood mixing with his as the helicopter rose and the ground fell away. This was the reason she'd learned to disappear. She didn't speak. Couldn't. Her jaw tightened once, just once, and then she was moving again, checking lines, verifying readings, her voice when it came steady as anesthesia. Stay with me, Major. Stay with me. He was crying. Silently. Tears cutting tracks down his face. By 4 a.m., Dr. Whitfield had made 6 phone calls. The first was to Dr. Malcolm Reeves, the board chairman who owed Whitfield a favor that had been compounding interest for 2 years, a prescription pad incident, 3 bottles of oxycodone unaccounted for, quietly handled, never reported. Whitfield's voice on the call was smooth as oil. We have a serious credentialing issue. One of our RNs performed a surgical procedure beyond her scope. I'm taking immediate action. Reeves didn't ask questions. Reeves never asked questions. The second call was to the phone numbers Laura had listed on her application as professional references. 2 rings on the first number and a man answered groggily, a burner phone in a cheap motel in Spokane. Someone Whitfield had paid cash to be exactly this available, exactly this useful. Whitfield planted his seeds with surgical precision, due diligence on a former colleague. Some inconsistencies in her training. Thought you should know we're investigating. Click. The third call was to the State Medical Board. 8 minutes on hold, then a recorded message accepting his complaint, RN practicing beyond scope of licensure. Emergency intervention without physician authorization. Potential patient endangerment. The complaint was filed. The wheels began to turn. The fourth call was to Patricia Vance, the HR director, who used the exact same medical supply contractor that had been depositing $4,200 monthly into Whitfield's Lake House mortgage, a mutually beneficial arrangement that both of them understood could evaporate with a single word to the wrong person. "We need to move quickly," Whitfield said. "Internal investigation. I'm forwarding you details." She understood. The fifth call was to investigator Thomas Samuels, the state credentialing specialist who'd built a reputation on credential verification and who had a particular talent for finding inconsistencies, discrepancies, red flags in backgrounds. For $2,000 in cash, paid through a consulting firm that existed only on paper, Samuels would be thorough. Exhaustive. Devastating. The sixth call was to security. Escort Ms. Bennett from the building when her shift ends. She's under investigation. Simple. Clean. Professional. Laura was in the ICU at 6:15 a.m., charting the Major's post-procedure vitals with the mechanical precision that came from thousands of hours in combat medicine. BP 124/68. Heart rate 86. O2 saturation 98% on room air. Urine output adequate. Neurologically intact. The trembling she'd done in the supply closet hours ago had burned off, replaced by the cold clarity that had kept her alive in Ramadi. The Major was asking for her. Not asking. Demanding. His voice had authority again, the way a warrior's voice does when he remembers who he is. "I need to see her. Now." But by then Patricia Vance was walking across the ICU floor, her shoes clicking against the tile in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. 2 security officers in her wake. Their badges caught the fluorescent lights and threw them back like accusations. Vance's voice was loud. Intentionally loud. Loud enough that every nurse at every station could hear every word. "Ms. Bennett, your nursing license is under investigation for practicing beyond your scope of practice. Your credentials are being verified by state investigators. Effective immediately, you're on administrative leave pending the outcome of this review." The weight of it landed like a helicopter landing on a rooftop, sudden, devastating, impossible to brace for. Laura logged out of the computer. The cursor blinked once. Twice. Then froze. She removed her badge from around her neck with 2 fingers. The laminate was worn from 2 decades of shifts. Her photograph on the badge was 5 years old. The name read, Laura Bennett, RN, Cedar Creek Medical. She set it on the desk with a soft click. One of the residents, the young one who'd laughed at Whitfield's cafeteria bet, looked away. Guilt was a texture she could feel even without seeing his face. The locker room was empty. 6:02 a.m. The shift change nurses hadn't arrived yet. Laura changed out of her scrubs in silence, the fabric sliding off like a skin she'd been wearing. Street clothes. Jeans. A grey sweater. The kind of clothes that meant nothing, that signaled nothing, that erased her. Her combat boots were in the bottom of the locker, wrapped in a plastic bag. She'd kept them for 20 years. Worn leather. The right heel scuffed where shrapnel had grazed it. She didn't lace them. Just carried them, cradled like something alive. Security escorted her through the lobby at 7:04 a.m. during shift change. 50 people moving in and out. Arriving staff with coffee cups. Visitors pushing flowers. Wheelchairs and 4 stands and the white noise of a hospital waking up. 2 security officers flanking her. Patricia Vance 2 steps behind, her face professionally neutral. Someone whispered. The whispers spread like a fire with no fuel, moving on pure momentum. That night, at 3:27 a.m., Laura sat in a vinyl booth at Morrison Street Diner on Powell Boulevard. The place was empty except for her and a waitress who'd stopped asking questions after the first refill was declined. The coffee in front of her had been cold for 43 minutes. The window reflected her face back at her, and in that reflection she saw someone she didn't recognize, someone hollowed out, someone erased. The first time she'd disappeared, it had been by choice. They'd ordered her to vanish, and she'd become a ghost, a nurse, a woman whose hands were only allowed to be healing hands, never the hands that had once carried weapons, never the hands that had made choices, never the hands of a Master Chief Petty Officer of the United States Navy. Now she was being erased again. But this time there was no choice. This time there was only the machinery of a man protecting his theft, a system protecting itself, the weight of gravity pulling her down. Her phone was off. Had been off since they'd walked her through the lobby. She owned 2 duffel bags of clothes, some books, a laptop, the combat boots. Everything else had been left behind in a locker at Cedar Creek Medical, in a life that had lasted exactly 3 shifts too long. The waitress approached. Her name tag said Diane. She was 60-ish, with the kind of posture that came from decades of standing on tired feet. "You want me to warm that up, hun?" Laura looked at the coffee. At the waitress. At her own reflection in the window behind them both. "No," Laura said quietly. "I think I'm done here." But she didn't move. And neither did anything else. The rain outside had stopped. The city was quiet. And somewhere across Portland, in a hospital that suddenly felt very far away, a major in an ICU bed was whispering a name that had been classified for 20 years. At 9:18 a.m. the next morning, the lobby of Cedar Creek Medical was chaos in motion, shift change arriving, visitors departing, a delivery truck blocking the emergency bay, nurses moving with the practiced urgency of people who had places to be and not enough time to get there. 3 mounted television screens hung from the ceiling, cycling through news channels, patient information, hospital announcements. At 9:19, every screen switched to a breaking news banner. Pentagon SEAL. Declassification announcement. The spokesperson was a woman in service dress blue, standing at a podium with the kind of gravity that meant this was something that had taken 20 years to say. At 0900 hours, Operation Copper Valley has been declassified. The following personnel records are now public and unsealed. The screen filled with a photograph. Navy fatigues. Ramadi, 2004. A woman standing with a unit, younger, eyes that were flat and steady and dangerous. The chyron ran beneath it in white text, Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett, missing since 2004. 50 conversations in the lobby stopped at the exact same moment. Major David Chen was being discharged. He was in a wheelchair, one arm in a sling, the other hand gripping the armrest so hard it was shaking. He was staring at the screen. His eyes filled with water, and his mouth opened, and a single word came out, not loud, not a shout, just a whisper that somehow cut through the entire lobby. Lighthouse 1. Frank Morris, the security guard, had been at Cedar Creek for 14 years. Before that, he'd been in the Gulf War. Before that, he'd been a lot of things. But when he heard those words, that call sign, that name, his body moved on muscle memory a quarter-century old. His hand snapped to his forehead in a salute so sharp it cut the air like a knife. His voice cracked open like a canyon, Master Chief Petty Officer on deck. Every eye in the lobby turned. The power of it, sudden, ancient, undeniable. The weight of a rank that hadn't been spoken in public for 20 years. A 2-star general in dress blues walked through the automatic doors. His footsteps had the sound of someone who'd worn authority his entire life. Behind him, 2 aides in pressed uniforms. In his hands, a folder. He opened it without stopping, his voice carrying to the corners of the room like a command being issued, Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett. 3 bronze stars with Valor. 2 purple hearts. Navy Cross for actions in Ramadi, November 2004. The silence was a living thing. The silence was a weapon. Major Chen pushed himself up from the wheelchair. She pulled me out of rubble. I was 6 years old. She took shrapnel in her back. She carried me. His voice broke. I've been looking for her for 20 years. She saved my life then. She saved my life last night. Dr. Whitfield was standing near the elevators, phone pressed to his ear, mid-call to a lawyer. His face drained of color, blood leaving cheek and chin and forehead until he was the color of something already dead. He lowered the phone. The general continued reading, his voice relentless, assigned to DevGru Medical Task Unit. Operation Copper Valley, classified black until 0900 hours today. Master Chief Bennett's current location and status unknown since 2004. Someone started clapping. One person. One sound. Then another person joined. Then another. Then the lobby erupted, not chaos, but something more organized, something more profound, something like the sound of recognition, the sound of truth returning from the dead. The lobby erupted, not chaos, but something more organized, something more profound, something like the sound of recognition, the sound of truth returning from the dead. Laura was escorted out of Cedar Creek Medical at dawn. Not fired. Not yet. Suspended pending investigation by the State Medical Board. A woman in a grey suit from HR walked beside her, professional sympathy in her voice, a folder of paperwork in her hands. The automatic doors hissed open. Rain hammered the parking lot like applause for something nobody wanted to celebrate. Laura's badge hung from a red lanyard now, restricted access, pending review. She didn't look back at the building. She'd learned long ago that looking back meant hesitation, and hesitation meant you were already gone. 23 hours later, at 3 in the morning, she sat in an all-night diner called The Grinder on Powell Boulevard. Chrome and vinyl seats. The smell of burnt coffee and old grease. A waitress with purple streaks in her hair refilled her cup without asking, and Laura didn't stop her. The coffee was cold now, skin forming on the surface. She stared at her reflection in the dark window, 46 years old, dark circles under her eyes like bruises you earned, not received, and in the glass she saw not a nurse but a woman suspended between identities, neither the person she'd been in Ramadi nor the person she'd pretended to be for 2 decades. Just a woman in borrowed clothes with nothing left to lose. Her phone sat face down on the table. She hadn't checked it since Whitfield's assistant called the State Board office at 4 p.m. yesterday. Didn't need to. She could feel the career collapsing in real time, the way you could feel a building settling after an earthquake, small shifts, irreversible damage. Then the television mounted in the corner flickered to morning news. Cedar Creek Medical's logo appeared. Laura's eyes lifted without her permission. The screen showed grainy Pentagon footage, declassified, the Chiron read, from Operation Copper Valley, a counterinsurgency mission in Ramadi spanning 2003 to 2005. The footage was washed out, blown-back desert, dust storms that looked like living things. Then a photo, crisp and official, a woman in Navy working uniform, rank insignia on her collar, face harder than the desert behind her. The caption read, Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett, Operations Chief, SEAL Team 3 Charlie Platoon. Missing, presumed casualty, Ramadi, 2005. Declassified this morning. The waitress paused mid-refill. Holy shit. That's... Don't, Laura said. Soft. Just one word, and the waitress set down the pot and walked away. The news anchor's voice continued, something about cold cases and missing military personnel, recent developments in Pentagon records. Laura didn't hear it. She was watching her own face on that screen, 20 years younger, eyes that had seen things that shouldn't exist, hands that had pulled a bleeding child from rubble while the air split open with gunfire. They were showing her real name. Her real rank. Her photograph. Everything she'd buried was surfacing. Her hands didn't shake. Training ran deeper than panic. 6 miles away, in Cedar Creek Medical's lobby, the morning shift was beginning when a nurse glanced at the wall-mounted television and said something that made 3 other staff members stop moving. The same grainy footage played. The same face. The major, still recovering in the step-down unit, was being wheeled through the lobby for a discharge evaluation when he heard the announcement and his head turned toward the screen like a compass needle finding north. He stared at the photograph for exactly 3 seconds. Then he pushed himself up from the wheelchair, his 3rd post-operative day, not cleared for standing yet, but he stood anyway, ribs screaming, incisions pulling tight beneath the bandages. A nurse reached for his arm. He waved her off and walked toward the television, movements careful but deliberate, the gait of a man who'd learned to ignore pain in Kandahar and Helmand Province. The screen showed an address, Cedar Creek Medical, Portland, Oregon, where the declassified operative was currently employed as a registered nurse. The major stared at the words. Then he turned to the elderly security guard standing by the main entrance, Frank Morris, 64 years old, 22 years Army, Desert Storm and Panama, the kind of man who could read a uniform the way other people read lips. Their eyes met for one heartbeat. Then the major said, his voice rough from surgery and something deeper than surgery, Lighthouse 1. Frank Morris's body went rigid. His hand came to his chest, not a handshake, not casual, but the formal thump of a salute, fist to sternum, the old way some soldiers still did it when military rank walked into a room. His voice, when he spoke, had the cut-glass authority of someone who'd spent his whole life respecting command structure, Master Chief Petty Officer on deck. 30 people heard it. Nurses stopped charting. Visitors paused mid-conversation. An elderly woman waiting for her daughter forgot to check her phone. The words hung in the air like something physical, something that changed the pressure of the room, and then the automatic doors slid open and a 2-star general walked through, dress uniform, medals like a second skin, the kind of presence that made you stand straighter without knowing why. He was holding a file folder. He opened it without preamble, voice clear enough to carry to the back of the lobby, Bronze Star. 2003, insurgent cell disrupted, intelligence package recovered. He paused. The lobby was so quiet you could hear the cardiac monitor in the ICU 3 floors up. Silver Star. 2004, 3 wounded Marines extracted under fire from a collapsed compound. 37 minutes under small arms fire. No casualties. Another pause. His eye swept the room like searchlights. Another Bronze Star. 2004, IED detonated during convoy operations. She pulled 2 soldiers from a burning Humvee. Both survived. He turned the page. The silence was so thick you could operate in it. 2 Purple Hearts. Shrapnel wounds, 2003 and 2005. And a Navy Cross. He let that sit. Navy Cross. The 3rd highest military decoration. The room understood what that meant. It meant extraordinary heroism. It meant the kind of action that saved lives at the cost of something you couldn't name. Navy Cross, 2005. While severely wounded, she provided medical aid to 6 casualties under sustained enemy fire in Ramadi. All 6 survived. She was listed as killed in action. She was decorated posthumously. She is standing in this hospital. The major stepped forward. His hand found the back of the wheelchair to steady himself, incisions pulling, blood pressure wavering, pain a constant hiss beneath his ribs, but he stayed vertical. His voice, when he spoke, cracked open like something breaking. She carried me out of fire when I was 6 years old. My family was in the wrong place when the IED detonated. Wrong intersection. Wrong minute. His eyes found Laura's across the lobby. She'd walked in silently from the parking garage elevator, drawn by the impossible. She put herself between me and the gunfire. She ran with me through Jolin district for 7 kilometers. She kept telling me I was going to live. She kept running. And today, his voice broke completely. 20 years later, she saved my life again. In this hospital. With her hands. With her mind. With who she actually is. They told her she was just a nurse. They were wrong. The room erupted, but it wasn't chaos. It was the sound of 60 people witnessing something larger than themselves, the recognition that they'd been standing next to a legend without knowing it, the sound of shame and respect colliding in the air like weather systems creating something new. In his office 3 floors up, Dr. Whitfield was watching the same newscast on his personal tablet. The color drained from his face like a bathtub unplugging. His hands shook. Both of them. Not from fear, but from the specific clarity of understanding that he'd just tried to destroy someone he didn't have the authority to touch, someone the government itself had spent 20 years protecting, someone whose career he'd just tried to eliminate on fabricated scope of practice violations. His phone began ringing. The first call was from Patricia Vance in HR. Her voice was clipped, professional, the tone of someone cutting a rope. "Dr. Whitfield, we need to discuss the state investigator's findings. He's arrived. He's asking about the medical supply contracts." Whitfield's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Vance continued, "The files that Laura Bennett flagged in inventory? The ones you said were routine? The investigator is here. He wants to speak with you. In 2 hours. Conference room B." The call disconnected. Whitfield sat very still. Then he opened his email. There was a message marked urgent from the State Medical Board, stamped received at 6:06 a.m., pending investigation, license suspension recommended pending review of billing practices and standard operating procedures compliance. His hand started shaking then. Both of them, like his body, understood before his mind caught up. Downstairs, in the conference room, a thin man named Samuels, State Medical Board investigator, 15 years in position, the kind of person who'd seen every flavor of fraud and corruption medicine could produce, was spreading documents across a stainless steel table. Patricia Vance stood against the far wall in damage control posture, her voice steady. "We want to be clear. The hospital is cooperating fully with this investigation. We've preserved all relevant files. We flagged the discrepancies internally." Samuels didn't look up. He was reading a purchase order dated 18 months ago. MedSource Solutions. Equipment listed, Philips Interliview cardiac monitors, list price $34,000 per unit. Invoice price $97,500 per unit. 3 units purchased. The difference, $189,000. And beneath it, another order. Same pattern. Different equipment. Same markup. Same company. And another. And another. He spread 18 months of invoices across the table. Each one was signed by Dr. Roland Whitfield, medical director. Each one showed charges 3 to 4 times the market rate. Each one was billed to Cedar Creek Medical's emergency department. Samuels made a call to the FBI field office. Then he made another call to the Financial Crimes Unit. Then he asked Patricia Vance the question, who authorizes all emergency department equipment purchases? She didn't need to answer. The invoices already had. By 10 a.m., CNN was running Major Chen's story, a Green Beret recognizing his childhood rescuer, a decorated Master Chief working as a night nurse, a government conspiracy that had lasted 2 decades and was now unraveling in real time. By noon, the Navy had issued official statements. By 1 p.m., Cedar Creek Medical's PR department was flooding news outlets with pre-written apologies. By 2 p.m., Dr. Whitfield's attorney was making phone calls, using words like problematic and exposure and immediate resignation recommended. At 2:27 p.m., federal agents arrived with a warrant. They took Whitfield out through the same lobby where they'd escorted Laura out yesterday, but this time there were cameras, and this time news vans lined the parking lot, and this time the security guards, Frank Morris and 2 others, stood at attention as he passed. Not a salute. Not respect. Just witnesses. The kind of attention that said you'd been seen, and the seeing would outlast you. His network crumbled. Board Chairman Reeves declined his call. HR Director Vance had her attorney field his messages. 3 colleagues who'd benefited from kickback schemes suddenly didn't recognize his number. The apparatus he'd built to destroy Laura Bennett was the same apparatus that was now cutting him loose to survive. 24 hours later, Laura returned to Cedar Creek Medical. Not as a nurse clocking in for a shift. As Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett, in dress uniform she hadn't worn since 2005. The blue and gold, the rank insignia, the medals on her chest, each one a story only she could tell. She wore the combat boots, lace-tight, the leather worn to the shape of her feet, the tread still carrying dust from Ramadi that wouldn't come clean. The lobby was packed. Staff who'd watched her be humiliated. Patients she'd cared for. Nurses who'd questioned whether she was really qualified. Veterans who'd heard the story on the news and came to stand witness. Major Chen, cleared for limited activity, standing without the wheelchair, at attention. Frank Morris in his dress uniform, chest out. A television crew set up near the entrance. The CEO of Cedar Creek Medical waiting by the information desk, face arranged in the expression of institutional remorse. Laura walked through the doors with the same composure she'd worn in Ramadi, not cold, not distant, just focused. Present. Here. Her presence made the air pressure change. 60 people felt it. The CEO extended his hand. His voice had the careful cadence of a statement she'd helped him prepare. Master Chief Bennett, we apologize for the failures of our leadership. We're reinstating you immediately with full back pay, benefits, a formal recognition, and an amended personnel file that reflects your rank and service. Laura listened without blinking. She took his hand. She shook it. Her grip was steady as a surgical laser. When she released him, she said, her voice carrying the weight of command, I didn't do this for reinstatement. I did it because a patient needed help. I'd do it again for the next one. She turned toward Major Chen. Her stone face cracked, just barely, just enough for him to see it. She walked to him, extended her hand. He took it like it was a lifeline. She said, voice softer now, the first softness anyone had heard from her in 48 hours, I'm glad you're okay, David. He was crying. Not hiding it. Not apologizing for it. Just crying. Laura held his hand a moment longer. Then she stood in front of the press and the hospital staff and the witnesses, and she said, Dr. Whitfield told me I was just a nurse. He was wrong about the just, but he was right about the nurse. That's what I am. That's what I choose to be. That's the rank that matters. 2 weeks later, Dr. Roland Whitfield was teaching CPR recertification classes at Portland Community College for $18 an hour. His medical license had been revoked pending federal fraud charges. The FBI was still processing $3 million in fraudulent billing across his 5-year tenure at Cedar Creek. His wife had divorced him. His children had changed their last names. Laura worked day shift now, her real name on her badge, her rank known. People stood a little straighter around her. Some asked questions. Most didn't. She kept the combat boots in her locker, still touched them every shift, the leather warm under her fingers, the memory stored in the soul. 1 week into her return, Major Chen came in for a follow-up evaluation. His incisions were healing clean. His strength was returning. He found Laura at the nursing station charting vitals. He waited until she looked up, then he said, thank you. For both times. Laura held his eyes. Then she said the words that held everything she'd learned in Ramadi and Portland and the 20 years between, power is not a title. Power is the ability to help. He nodded. They both knew she wasn't just talking about him. If you found this story powerful, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss when we share the next one. And comment below, have you ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your true value? We read every single comment, and your stories matter.